Most of the time, there's not a fire to put out, and yet you're still putting your attention on that thing that isn't a bright spot. And we're neglecting the gold that is the bright spot that we have as an organization, as a person, as a manager, as a leader. The year was 2010, and I was headed down to that bustling metropolis, Champaign, Illinois, where the Deer and Turkey Expo was being held. But I wasn't alone. My wife and my partner in crime, Susan, she was driving down with me. Now, I was the sales professional. Vortex was still very young, so we were headed down to the show. We were not only going to show in our booth, but we were also going to sell because, quite frankly, we didn't have that many retailers at the time. Now, my wife, not a sales professional, okay? She was purely there from a support standpoint, setting up the booth, tearing it down, going to run to get lunch, you know, all that logistical stuff. I was going to do the important stuff, or so I thought. Because you see, as I had gotten in a couple days in the show, I had noticed something. What I noticed was my wife, who was just there for help and support, was actually outselling me about 4 or 5 to 1. Now, I love getting the sales, but that was a big problem for me and my pride because, again, I was the sales professional. I was competitive. She was just there to help. So finally, when there was a break in the action, I turned to my wife and I said, honey, what is going on? I said, you're outselling me 4, 5 to 1. What is your secret? She looked at me and she said, you know, the thing is, Joe, I just tell them all about our VIP warranty. And she goes, and you keep telling them about every feature and benefit, the edge-to-edge clarity, the brightness under low light, how durable it is. And she said, people get confused with all of that. I just keep it simple. I talk about the VIP warranty and, you know, they pull out their credit card, they pull out their cash. Now, that was another big problem for me because, you see, I loved our VIP warranty, which is our very important promise that we will always take care of you before, during, and long after the sale. We will repair, replace anything for free, no charge, even if it's your fault. I love that about us, but you see, I didn't want them to choose Vortex because of that. I wanted that to be kind of the cherry on top. It was great, but let's put it over here. I want them choosing Vortex for things like edge-to-edge clarity and brightness under low light and very durable. And after all, I didn't want them thinking that their product was going to break. We make really good stuff. So that's what I told my wife, you know, thinking that she was wrong, even though she's got 4 or 5 to 1 sales. And she just looked at me and smiled. She said, well, honey, you keep telling them what you do and I'll keep telling what I do and we'll see how it shakes out. Well, you can guess how that shook out. She continued to outsell me about 4 to 5 to 1. This was many years ago and I was a little bit more hard-headed back then. Now, a couple weeks went by. I've been licking my wounds for a couple weeks, and I was headed down to Utah to one of our largest retailers. It was a chain retailer that's still going today, but they were headquartered in Utah. And so often when you go to the headquarters, you will meet with the buyer, you'll discuss new products, you'll discuss their store set, and then of course decisions are made there and they're sort of dispersed out to all the stores around the country. So we did that, great meeting. But what I would always ask the buyer is who in the stores, like behind the counter, who do I need to talk to? Who really understands the customer the best? Who's selling the most optics or the most Vortex? And I loved getting to the store level. I loved getting in the trenches and observing and especially talking to the men and women behind the counter that are selling our stuff. So the buyer said, and we'll call him John, you need to go see John. And I believe it might have been the Logan store, but it was one of the stores in Utah. You need to see this guy. He sells more optics than anybody in our organization, and he loves Vortex. So I was thrilled. I headed to the store and I talked with John. Now, John was kind of a mix of Grizzly Adams meets Santa Claus. He was an older gentleman, big bushy beard, smile on his face, twinkle in his eye. And I talked with him for a while about the different trends that he was noticing. And finally, I turned to him and I said, John, I hear that you sell Vortex better than anybody. I said, what is your secret? Well, he looked at me and he smiled, and you probably know where this is going. He said, Joe, The thing is, I just tell them about that VIP warranty. Ooh, it was like burning coals on my head. I said, did my wife call you beforehand and tell you to say that? I said, John, I love our VIP warranty. I love that we take care of the customer. But I said, but I don't want people thinking that our product's going to break. We make really good stuff. It's got great edge-to-edge clarity, brightness under low light, durable, all these features and benefits. He just kind of looked at me and said, hey, Joe, those things are great and you do a good job at them. But what people really want to know is that you've got their back no matter what. And that VIP warranty says that. And so I keep it simple and I continue to just focus on the VIP warranty. Now, again, pretty hard-headed, so I'm flying back and I'm thinking, Susan's got it wrong, and I'm thinking, John's got it wrong. Everybody's got it wrong but me, okay? So I get back, and back then I read a lot of business books. I still read a lot of business books, but post kids and things like that. Sometimes life gets in the way, so I don't read quite as much. But back then I was reading a particular book by the Heath brothers, and it was Switch. Now the book's all about change, but I came across this chapter that was called Bright Spots, okay? Now, there's several different stories in that chapter, and I'm gonna talk about one. I'm gonna talk about the impact that it had on me, and ultimately it had on Vortex and our business. So I'm reading one of the stories in the Bright Spots chapter, and it's about this guy, Jerry Sternin. Now, Jerry Sternin was a guy back in the 90s who worked for an organization, I believe it was Feed the World, okay? And Jerry, it's a nonprofit, and Jerry and his small team were given a task that was extremely difficult. They were tasked with going over to Vietnam, which had one of the worst, if not the worst, malnutrition amongst children in the world, okay? And they were tasked with essentially trying to make a big dent and an improvement in malnourishment in children in Vietnam. Okay, so that's a big problem, and that's a tough task already. But actually, for Jerry and his team, it got worse. You see, here's the thing. The local politicians, they didn't want him there. On top of that, Jerry and his team didn't speak the language. And finally, if that wasn't enough, Jerry and his team pretty much had no money. All right? So no money, don't speak the language, the local politicians don't want you there, and we have this massive problem of malnourishment amongst children. What do? Well, Jerry and his team did an interesting thing. I'm a little ashamed to say I wouldn't have thought of it. What Jerry and his team did is when they got to Vietnam, they fanned out into the rural areas where malnourishment was the worst. And what they looked for is instead of the problem of malnourishment, this massive problem, they looked for, are there any children that are healthy, that are well-nourished, that are actually thriving despite these conditions and despite this type of environment? And in fact, they found, yes, there was kids, and they labeled these kids bright spot kids. Now, they had to remove anybody from the data and their research that maybe had access to somebody that was wealthy, that was in government within Vietnam, or somebody outside of Vietnam that could get them money and ultimately them food. And sure enough, again, there was these bright spot kids. And I'll spare you the details, but they started to investigate what were these parents, and it's a very patriarchal country. So in particular, what are the mothers doing differently with these kids, these healthy kids, versus these malnourished kids? And they found several distinct things that they were doing differently. In fact, a couple of those things were actually viewed as low-class food prep. And it just so happened it actually allowed the kids to be very well nourished. So I'll spare you the details on those specifics. But what was happening is the mothers were doing 3 to 4 clear different things that allowed these kids to be bright spot kids. Okay? Now, when I read that, it was like a lightning bolt went off, because what Jerry and his team did after they found the bright spot kids and after they found out the four things that the mothers did differently is they had those mothers then teach other women and mothers within the community to do the exact same things. And within 6 months, the communities that they were working with, they had improved malnourishment by 65%. And they used that same model all throughout Vietnam and through the next couple years, and then throughout the world. They had eradicated much of child malnourishment around the world, and certainly within Vietnam. So they found the bright spots, and they tripled down on the bright spots, and they tried to replicate the bright spots. We're going to come back to that. So I'm reading that story. I'm in my cubicle. This is early in the morning at Vortex. Okay, and this is after the situation in Illinois, deer in turkey with my wife, Susan, after the conversation with John. Hey there. And finally, okay, that hard head, maybe it split open, and the lightning bolt hit, and I realized, I can't believe it. The VIP warranty is our bright spot. That's our bright spot. That's what we're known for. That's what people love. That's why they choose us. That's why Susan was out selling me 4 to 5 to 1. That's why John was selling so much Vortex, and it was so easy. You see, what it wasn't was all that edge-to-edge clarity, all that brightness under low light, all the durability. Now, that was important. You need to have those, but that wasn't the differentiator. That wasn't the bright spot. That wasn't the breakthrough. So I'm sitting there, and I have this epiphany, and I start looking around my desk, and I start grabbing the Vortex price list. I start looking through that. There's nothing about the VIP warranty. I grab our catalog. I'm paging through the catalog, cover, back cover, inside. Nothing on the VIP warranty. I look over at our showroom, which it doubled as a showroom for customers and visitors, but also it was a way for us to show our retailers how to merchandise their store with Vortex stuff. I'm looking at the counter mats. I'm looking at those POP stands. I'm looking at the posters. You know where this is going. There's nothing about the VIP warranty. I already knew the answer to this next one, but I went in the back in the warehouse. I grabbed our product box. I'm looking at every side of the box. Nothing on the VIP warranty. I open up the box. There's nothing on the VIP warranty. I look at our website when I get back to my desk. There's virtually nothing on the VIP warranty save for one page under the link service. I'm thinking, boy, we got an opportunity here. The VIP warranty is our bright spot, and we aren't even highlighting it. So like Jerry did with those mothers, he got other mothers to replicate those things. He doubled down on those bright spot kids and what was happening there. I said, we need to double down on our VIP warranty bright spot. So you're going to find it next year's price list, catalog, counter mats, posters. One side of our box will have the VIP warranty. We even got these crazy stories about people that their dog would chew up their binocular, and we would service it with the VIP warranty, and they'd write something hilarious, and it was like, oh, we're going to turn those moments, those stories, into our marketing. You're going to find the VIP warranty all over the website, okay? All over the website. So the VIP warranty was already a catalyst. It was already a bright spot. But it wasn't the bright spot that I wanted it to be. I loved it. I liked it. I thought it was great. I thought it was the cherry on top, but it wasn't the reason I wanted people to pick us, okay? And that was a big mistake. That was a big mistake. My own ego and my pride got in the way of something that was very simple and very easy. Maybe not simple to do a VIP warranty, okay? That's another story. But it was simple to explain. The customers got it. They felt comfortable. They already knew we had. I mean, they just looked through the product. They already knew the edge-to-edge clarity was good and the brightness under low light. They could feel the durability. They already knew that was good, but that was kind of table stakes. What really stood out is that we would always have their back. So we doubled down on it. We tripled down on it. And it made a huge, huge difference for Vortex, okay? Now, all right, great story, Joe. What does that mean for me? Maybe you run a company. Most people don't. Maybe I work at a company. Maybe I don't even work anymore. I'm retired, okay? Or I'm a stay-at-home parent. So what's the lesson for our lives there? Well, I think for many of you, you're going to already have connected the dots. But just in case you didn't, let's talk about that. What's really going on most of the time with every person is they have a bright spot, okay? They have something about them personally that's a strength, or something about their organization that's a strength, that's a bright spot. And so what do? They do the same thing I did with a VIP warranty. Okay, that bright spot, that thing is working good. Let's just set it aside over here and let's work on this thing that's not working so good. Let's put our attention on this thing that's not working so good. I got this employee over here, they're crushing it. So let's kind of leave them alone because they're doing good, and then let me focus on these employees that are not doing so good. Now, mind you, I'm not saying working on those things is a bad thing. And by all means, if your organization, if your life's on fire, you got to put that fire out.
What'd you say?
But most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, there's not a fire to put out, and yet you're still putting your attention on that thing that isn't a bright spot. And we're neglecting the gold that is the bright spot that we have as an organization, as a person, as a manager, as a leader. So that's the lesson of our lives. Don't take for granted your bright spot. That's number one. Number two is check your ego at the door. Your bright spot may not be what you want it to be. The bright spot of the VIP warranty wasn't what I wanted it to be in 2010, but that was our bright spot. The bright spot was what the bright spot was. That's the second thing. And the third thing you need to do is you need to double down, triple down, quadruple down on your bright spot. That is where the gold is. So you put more attention, you put more time, you put more energy, you put more money behind something that's a bright spot that's already doing well. The other way that you can come at that is, can we replicate the bright spot? That's what Jerry did, okay? We have these bright spot kids. Can we replicate it by leaning into the bright spot? Listen, this whole movement that we have is called the CARE movement, and CARE stands for Create a Rare Experience, okay? It's all about creating an incredibly unique, memorable experience for your business, within your life. And even though that's our mission, and you might say it differently, I think everybody has that mission. I think everybody wants to create a rare experience. And the best way that you can do that is to understand what your bright spot is. Double down on it, replicate it. And to the extent that you can magnify that bright spot is the extent that you can create a rare experience. Listen, guys, movements are built on connection. If this resonated, share it and join the conversation. Hit that subscribe button or check the show notes where you can follow me on all my socials. Or check out more about the movement at vortexcare.com. Let's build something rare together.